I wouldn't say it's a goal to have it done as late as possible to create this sense of panic, but it's also an advantage to do it in the middle of production because it's where we understand the need. It's so much more likely to converge on a solution that's going to work for the production. When we work way out ahead of production, we don't really understand their need, and they're not in an ability yet to be able to test what we're developing. So we end up kind of veering off into the weeds sometimes. So in the case of Hyperion, we didn't know we could do it. We had an idea. We understood that there were going to be challenges on this show, and generally going forward. And I'd been thinking a long time about this problem. And when we had this idea to do rendering this new way, separate from the production, we started an experiment. And we dedicated resource to testing these ideas. And we made a proof of concept. And that proof of concept was to demonstrate that the idea would work at a production scale. It did, so then we were still just early enough of production that we had a hope of making it. And we agreed that the benefit would be compelling enough if we could pull this off that we were going to try. And so we tried. Both the show and the Hyperion team worked as hard as we could to line things up and get things done in time. And we ran with 2 rendering pipelines for a while, and it was going pretty well. So we just put it all in on Hyperion and said, it's not finished, but we're confident that either it will finish or we'll find a way.
Yeah, it was. That's why I said sort of in the initial answer. Is it was sort of a blessed convergence. The idea of Hyperion was underway, or what would become Hyperion was a science experiment that was going off on the side, that was yielding some really interesting results, and the promise of scope and scale that it might be able to achieve one day just aligned really nicely with what the director's vision for San Francisco and Big Hero 6 were. And it was too good an opportunity to pass up. We had to, even though we knew it would be painful, we knew what we were signing up for. Building a renderer while making the movie that needs that renderer is a very scary proposal, but it just felt right.
Yeah, I think creatively we couldn't have done the movie the way we envisioned it if we didn't have Hyperion. So there's one aspect of, if we can't get this to work, it's not going to be the movie we want. So I think there was a lot of motivation to make this work. We encouraged artists very early on when it was being developed to jump in and grab the render and start experimenting with it, which provided a lot of feedback to the Hyperion group on issues with the tools. But also what it did was it started developing this culture where the artists were seeing like how amazing this render could be. And it was one of those things that I think culturally the artists didn't see any other way of going back either. They wanted this tool. So it really ended up being, the whole studio started to be this force that pushed Hyperion forward, which is what it needed, because it was a really risky kind of thing to do. It was like the tracks were getting laid just as we were needing the things. It's like we need the sequence with volumetrics is coming up, the wormhole, and a month before it's just that stuff's just coming online and we're getting it. So it was at the end of the day, though, I think it, like Brent said, it really, you got a lot of the feedback right in the moment as the render was being developed, which was really beneficial.
Around 5 years ago, we were moving into a place where we were going to be making a film a year. And the films usually have about a 2.5 year production schedule. That's how long I was on Big Hero 6, for instance. That means there's significant overlap between the shows. And because we want to be pursuing ambitious things, we want to be delivering really beautiful, amazing films, some of the lead times on development efforts are lengthy. So 5 years ago, we realized we can't have each film be its own little world, in terms of the things it's pursuing. And so we coined a term, the Continuum of Development, that we're going to take a step back as often as we can and start to look at how are we moving as a studio. And that means sometimes embarking on R&D initiatives before there's a show that necessarily needs it, but we can see it coming. We can see particular needs coming. Certain films absolutely, like Big Hero 6 needing to build the city of San Francisco, films absolutely drive certain kinds of R&D, but there's also R&D that just makes us better at what we do on every film. And this was in that latter camp.
Yeah, so global illumination has been coming for a while. And we've been getting pieces of it before Hyperion with indirect diffuse point clouds and so on. And we knew the benefits. We knew the potential benefits. We knew what other studios were reporting with their efforts. And we were moving in that direction. But we weren't able yet to transition to ray trace global illumination because of two things. The geometric scale of our environments meant that it just wouldn't work with all the environment in. And we're very texture map heavy. We're art driven, so we do everything by painting, and we put dozens of texture layers on just about everything in the environment. And with all these textures, we tried ray tracing, indirect lighting with a traditional renderer, and as soon as it hits a texture map, it just dies. And it doesn't matter like how big the cache you make, it just can't handle it.
Well, because you touched on it earlier, the idea that in a traditional ray tracer, the rays are bouncing around incoherently. You don't know moment to moment as you're processing the rays which texture it's going to need. So it's grabbing randomly at all of these layered textures, and it's prohibitively expensive.
So we knew we had this challenge, and we had this pain point of managing these point clouds because it's a data problem. You have to generate it as a separate step. As an artist, you have to set them up a certain way to get them to work. They were massive files that had to be managed. And so we were trying for a long time, how do we get to ray trace everything? How do we get rid of point clouds? How do we get, painless global illumination? And so these ideas, these needs were percolating, and we picked at this with lots of different efforts and tools. But it finally just took this big idea and big effort to really solve it for us.
It's worth mentioning too that really it was the creative needs of Big Hero 6 that really made us go, we're going to throw all our eggs in this basket and go with Hyperion, because at the end of the day, we made decisions to put other things on hold and other ideas on hold to make this happen. So I think Big Hero 6 ended up being something that creatively really lined up with this idea that was percolating with Brent here. If it had been a different movie, there might have been something else that would have been better to put your resources at. So it was kind of nice that the vision for Big Hero 6 lined up with this kind of R&D project that was going on.
Well, certainly the big ones we've talked about include building the city of San Francisco, which was a significant technical endeavor. Being able to build a city that you don't have to rely on environment maps, painted map backgrounds and things like that, but you could actually visit the various districts of the city. That was a really big undertaking. We built a whole new crowd system because we wanted to populate the city with a lot of people. So we could have these big spectacle scenes with thousands of characters walking around, but we could also put the characters right up alongside the hero characters. So they're these crowd characters standing right alongside the main characters, watching Hero's presentation in the expo hall, or walking through the street while he's chasing Baymax and getting in his way. That was a big endeavor. We built a whole new authoring system for crowd characters called Denizen that we actually had a lot of fun with. It was this really fun, you could style the characters in a really fun, interactive way. And we had so much fun with it, we let it loose on the employees at Disney, and they got to go in and craft themselves and put themselves in the movie. So there's a lot, there are scenes of the movie that have, employees at Disney walking, or, caricatured versions of them in the style of the movie, walking past, out on the sidewalk or whatever while Hero's chasing Baymax and things like that. That was a lot of fun. We built what we think is one of the largest render farms that's been built for the industry, 55,000 cores. We had a queuing system that we started on Wreck-It Ralph that we had been evolving. Again, as a longer term development effort, because we saw the complexity, the scope, the scale of what we were pursuing was growing beyond our bounds. So we couldn't find a vendor product that really did the job for us and in the way we needed to do it. So we had this vision for what we wanted to pursue in a whole new way of queuing up jobs and managing that and keeping the queue 100% occupied 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we built a new system called CODA, and then this was our first really major stress test of those ideas. Even though they had been started a few years earlier, we certainly, CODA very gracefully handled this tremendous load that we placed on it. We were clocking over 1 million core hours a day while we were making this movie. It was, a crazy amount of compute power going into generating these beautiful images, and so I think that's also worth mentioning, just that it held up under all of that.
Coda also had to work with the way our render jobs worked. We're all now doing all our queue jobs as multi-threaded, and so there's just more complex resource management that it had to do.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning too. It wasn't just with Coda and the queuing system. It wasn't just a technical change, but it was actually a cultural change, because we needed every render hour to count. We couldn't have wasted render hours. So a group of us would meet every day. Usually we had a kickoff meeting with the production at 9:15. Everybody comes in. What are the issues today? What's going on? There's a group of us that would come in a half hour earlier, and we would look at the render jobs from the night before, and what are the jobs that have been sitting on a queue for too long? Why are they sitting too long? And we'd really deep dive into what was going on with the render, and prioritize the renders so the right renders were getting through every night. And once we identified those problems, we could work with the Hyperion team and try to solve problems to make things go faster, or work with the lighting supervisors on trying to come up with another solution for trying to solve the creative problem we were trying to solve, but in a more efficient way. But it was really important. We had this tool that could manage the system, but we had to be really stringent about making sure that every frame counted that we were throwing at that queue.
And we've talked about Hyperion quite a bit in this. It's worth noting that Hyperion is a whole new way of rendering. Just the way you interact with it, the way you put lights in your scene, all that was different than the way we'd been functioning. The kinds of data that the artist would manage was different. So we had to overhaul our entire lighting pipeline around the renderer. We did a lot of really significant work in the user-facing tools, right, for how they interact with setting up the scene, putting the lights in the scene, both because of the new renderer and because of the needs of the show. We had cars driving around on streets and things like that, so we needed to figure out a way to place lights in assets more efficiently, because the headlights on the cars need to travel along successfully with the cars and not be left behind when the car moves. We did a lot of work in street lights and traffic lights and all kinds of things of how do we present an asset-based lighting system to the lighters, how do we change the tools to be most effective interacting with this new renderer. Was a significant development effort that was traveling right alongside. As features were coming online, we were having lots of discussions about how would an artist use it, how would they not want to use it, what would the tools be like for them to use it in its best light. So.
Yeah, and culturally within lighting and lighting dailies, that changed as well. With Hyperion, it very early on the image starts resolving, but it's a noisy image. But that's all right for creative purposes. We could go look at shot and dailies, and they could be noisy, but we could look at, is the scene got the right mood? Do we want to change the light positions, the colors of the lights? Those things we could see with a really noisy image. In fact, because of really needing to be efficient with the renders, we would get shots approved from the directors that were very noisy, but they knew the benefit of the way the movie was going to look at the end of the day. It was worth taking a little bit of a leap of faith and looking at the image, these shots that were noisy and sometimes rendered on very few frames. Many shots were approved on 1 or 2 frames, and action shots might be on 4s, 2s if it was a really important thing. Rarely did we get a shot approved that was very resolved as far as the noise, or on ones. So that was something new culturally.
We have a very collaborative environment between the two studios. We share technologies, but there are cultural differences, absolutely. The way we pursue our films, we deliberately aim to create a very flexible workflow. We change the story, we iterate on it until very, very late into production as we're evolving it. So our pipeline's considerably different. The tools that we employ, we are more texture-based instead of procedural for how textures are generated. We did start out as a 2D studio. We have a lot of that aesthetic in our style of animation, in the way we generate our environments, that we think is pretty unique to the look of our movies. Ed and John are great about allowing both studios to innovate and share. And so we're not beholden to try and figure out how to be the same. And that's actually really nice. We each try out ideas. I mean, Hyperion was a science experiment. We didn't know that it was going to pan out. And we were, not only allowed, but encouraged to go pursue it. We're encouraged to try new ideas, and they're encouraged to try new ideas, and then we sync back up. We talk about what was good and what was bad about those ideas, and then we see if they have applicability to each other's studios. So we share quite a bit of things, but the philosophies, the people that are working there are some differences, and I think some of that is because of our foundation in 2D, just in some of our workflows and things. But it works for us. We like it, and we don't feel pressured to change, which is nice.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that sets us apart from most studios is our legacy. So, for example, on Tangled, we had Glenn Keane doing drawovers over the animation, and really, here's someone who trained under the masters at Disney Animation, passing that legacy on to the new animators. We have animators like Eric Goldberg that will do these inspiration animations that eventually we do in CG, but they're so inspiring. And then, for example, with the wormhole, we actually, a lot of times we look at we're open to looking at all kinds of inspiration, live action, other animated movies. But in that particular case, we looked back at, there was a sequence in Aladdin, which was the Cave of Wonders. That was, it had a lot of deep colors, but they never went to black. And that was for the wormhole. We really wanted something different that didn't look like something that you might have seen in some kind of natural setting. And that was the thing that really inspired the wormhole, this place that went to these really vivid colors instead of just falling off naturally like they would in real life.
This is my first time, which is a shame because I'm having a great time. It's a really amazing conference. I think the biggest thing for me, we work really hard on these films, and we spend 2.5 years kind of in this contained little bubble with our artists and our technicians trying to create this thing, and then we put it out to the world, and then we come to a place like this, and we get to talk to the people who want to do what we do someday, want to come work at places like Disney or Pixar or wherever, and there's such enthusiasm, such excitement. We've already had these just wonderful conversations just in the first day with students who are here at this conference. And there's an energy level, a real excitement, not just for what we've done, but for what our industry does. There's a passion there it's infectious. It's really, really fun to be a part of those conversations. So I'm having a great first FMX.
I would second all of that. It's also my first FMX, and I think it's got a great energy, a great vibe, and it's nice to see people who are hungry for tech and art and everything that we do. And I like that it's a more intimate kind of a conference.